Kubrick's Universe, Episode 4, Filippo Ulivieri. Real one.
Our highly skilled team are focused on bringing you the optimal experience.
So many answers we may never know. Too many questions, get on with the show. No time for the chorus, only this verse. It's Kubrick's Universe.
The podcast doors house.
It's Kubrick's Universe, the Stanley Kubrick podcast.
Dear Amelia, welcome back. Please call Michael Doven and say that I figured out on the way home in the car at 3 a.m. that we will have a full day shooting. Please look for my orange yellow 548 unless you are here. If someone has to...
For 30 years, I worked for him, with him, in his office, on location, in his house, inside his apartment.
Treated very, very carefully.
I drove him. I took him to the studios. I took the actors to meet him. I took his daughters to school. I took care of his cats and dogs. I took his wife to art galleries and his parents around London.
This is the last email pickup. I am very sad.
I did so many things, met so many people. Every day it was something different, something new.
No one could have done more.
He was my employer, but he was also my university.
I couldn't have gotten through without you.
He was my friend. He was really like a father.
Dear Emilio, good luck. I will miss you. Love, Stanley.
He was Stanley Kubrick.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back, and thanks for tuning in to a brand new episode of Kubrick's Universe. At the boards is Mr. So Handsome himself, our producer, Stephen Rigg. I'm your host and humble narrator, Jason Furlong. So we have for you today a great guest and a great guy. It's Filippo Ulivieri. Now, Filippo is a writer and teacher of film theory and is the leading expert on Stanley Kubrick in Italy. He collaborated with Kubrick's longtime driver and assistant, Emilio D'Alessandro, on Emilio's memoir, Stanley Kubrick and Me, 30 Years at His Side. Filippo was also one of the co-script writers on Alex Infischelli's companion film, S is for Stanley. He's the founder and webmaster of Archivio Kubrick, one of the most comprehensive repositories of interviews, reviews, articles, photographs, and videos about Kubrick in one single place. Recently, at the Stanley Kubrick New Horizons conference held at the University of Bordeaux, he lectured on From Boy Genius to Barking Loon, an analysis of Stanley Kubrick's persona in American and English media. It's a real treat to have you with us today, Filippo. Thanks so much for being on Kubrick's Universe. Welcome.
And thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure.
The pleasure is all ours, I assure you. Weather is all right over there in Italy?
Actually, I'm in the UK now. I'm in Plymouth.
You are?
Yeah, so it's a beautiful afternoon. Rarely, sometimes it gets rainy, but today is a nice, beautiful afternoon here in Plymouth, in Devon.
Wonderful. I guess my first question would be, we all have our own stories about what drew us to Stanley Kubrick and how he kind of became part of the fabric of our own lives, if you will, and when did our interest grow? So how and when, Filippo, did you first encounter the films of Stanley? And when did you become a fan, just a fan at first? When did that start for you?
Yeah. I think I was in high school. I was developing a strong interest in films, and I tried to watch as many of them as possible. And I rented VHS tapes. I recorded the films broadcasted late at night on television. The usual thing that a film buff would do in the 90s. And it sounds like a century ago, but it makes me feel a bit old, but that's what we did in the 90s. And anyway, I think it was 2001: A Space Odyssey, the film that brought me to Kubrick, because I remember I watched it and then I bought a book to read something about it. And by simply flipping through this book, I discovered that lots of the films that I had liked were in fact made by this director, Stanley Kubrick, which I knew nothing about. And he also made The Shining, which made a great impression on me when I saw it on television. And so I got more and more interested in his work, and then read another book, and then another, and then another. And then I tried to watch his earlier films. I bought videotapes, and from that, it grew on me.
That sounds very similar to my experiences and a lot of us who were VCR kids, Filippo.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering what films of Kubrick's you saw after 2001 and The Shining. Do you remember the order of which?
No, I don't remember the order. I remember I was very excited to see Eyes Wide Shut because it was my first film. My first Kubrick film I got the opportunity to see on the big screen when it opened in 1999. And I remember I was watching The Killing when I was at the university. I bought a tape. I also remember having seen A Clockwork Orange during high school, when, usually, I don't know if it's something that it happens only in Italy or in UK or in US as well, but usually every year or so there is a sort of a benign revolution within the classroom once a year around November. So for a week, the students get the opportunity to protest against the system, and they organize the screening and they organize the discussions about books or films they are passionate about. So I remember that when I was, I think, in first grade or my second year, in my high school, I got the opportunity to see A Clockwork Orange when I was not allowed to, because I wasn't 18 years old. And so that was a kind of something of a forbidden thing. And I remember I wasn't really impressed by A Clockwork Orange, because I knew that it was supposed to be a very shocking film, a very violent film, and I found it more sort of an ironic tale. And so, but these are my small experiences of getting in touch with Kubrick's films for the first time.
That's interesting. I don't believe that we have anything, at least in the public schools of the United States, that I'm aware of, which would be similar to the peaceful student revolution that you described. But that sounds like a lot of fun, Filippo.
Yeah, it was. So we are kind of very lucky to have. It was, in a way, an established revolution, which is something of an oxymoron. But it happened maybe once a year, every 2 years, or something like that. So.
Well, and to show a film like Clockwork Orange, which plays
was
upon
controversial.
Yeah, and it plays upon such, prevalent themes of youth rebellion versus authoritarian figures. And your young students of high school age, getting permission to watch A Clockwork Orange in the school, I think that's really cool. So let me ask you about your website, Archivio Kubrick, which For our listeners who may not be aware, Filippo started this website, and it's a behemoth. I mean, it's absolutely amazing, and you must check it out. You started Archivio Kubrick, Filippo, in 1999, which, of course, was the year Stanley passed away all too soon. So my question is, do you recall what prompted you to start the site?
Yeah, actually, it didn't have much to do with Kubrick dying, because in 1999 I was doing a course in new media at my university, and students were encouraged to experiment with the internet, doing research and build their own website. And at the beginning, what I did was a general personal web page, with the nickname and all the usual things that one at that time put online. And my site was divided into sections that reflected my interests, such as communication, literature, cinema, technology, and of course Stanley Kubrick. And I remember one of the very first things that I did for the Kubrick section was to transcribe the interviews that Tom Cruise, Nicole Kidman, and Christiana Kubrick did when they attended the European premiere of Eyes Wide Shut in Venice at the film festival.
Oh, wow.
And I wanted these interviews that were published in newspapers to be available for people to read, because back then, if you missed something, you had to go to a library and try to find the back issue. So it was not really easy. And I typed these articles and put them online. So I liked the idea of building a database of Kubrick resources. So in retrospect, you see that I had an archivist attitude right from the beginning. And after a while, it became apparent that the only section of my website, of my personal website, that I liked to update was the one about Kubrick. So in 2001, which is again another coincidence, but a significant number, I established Archivio Kubrick as a website entirely focused on Kubrick and his films.
I mean, it's such an impressive site, and it's very fun and user friendly. Very intuitive and just effortless to enjoy for anyone.
The problem is that I did it when I was younger. My knowledge of English language was even limited than the one that I have now. So unfortunately, the vast majority of the website is in Italian. I tried to do an English version of it with the help of my roommate when I was living in Rome. She was from Texas, so she helped me translate some of the pages. But then the work was too big, too great. It was a massive job to translate everything into English or to restore the English version of the articles that I translated into Italian. So in the end, I just didn't have the time, and most of it is still in Italian, and it's still a work in progress. So in a way, I'm kind of sorry that I didn't manage to finish the website, because the crazy idea that I had was to build a website that contained all the resources that were available about Kubrick, like old magazines, the press material, and so on. But I simply don't have the time.
Well, I certainly wouldn't worry about, with technology today, and it sounds like it's something that we're both interested in. As I was a communications major in university myself. Anyone can, copy and paste and translate now, but I was just going to say that I'm sure even your earliest attempts with the website in English are far superior to any number of Americans who continue to butcher the English language on a regular basis. But I digress.
Too kind.
With the efforts you'd made towards your website, Archivio Kubrick, we all know that it's benefited the online community and the Stanley Kubrick community. What's your personal sense of pride and how you feel that Archivio Kubrick has benefited the Kubrick community at large, and yourself as a student of Stanley's work?
As its name suggests, Archivio Kubrick has always been a database of documents, really. And I was and still am more interested in documenting Kubrick's career than analyzing his films from, say, a critical point of view. I think it's fun to interpret films, but after a while it becomes a little boring for me. So right from the beginning, as I said, it had the impossible goal, to store all the material that is published about Kubrick. And these resources, the one that I managed to put online, have been used by many students in Italy for their assignments. I receive lots of emails from Italian students in school and in universities. And this is really gratifying, because it was exactly the purpose why I built the website in the first place. And this is also the reason why I'm sorry that I cannot go on with this job at the moment, because as it is now, the website stores around 1 gigabyte of material, but I haven't had the time to update it since really ages. And you have to take into consideration the fact that it is all handmade, HTML language, as it was done in the old days. And it's really like your grandma's knitwork, and it takes time, and it becomes easily obsolete. So, it's a pity that it's unfinished, and it is true that one can always add things when they are online. So hopefully, in the future, I will be able to try and put more of the stuff that I have online for everybody to see. But if this is what I usually answer to the people that contact me. If you have a specific interest in a film, and you haven't found what you look for in the website, please write me an email, because there is a likely chance that what you are looking for is somewhere in my boxes or in my computer, so I can try and find some time to scan it or send it to you in any way. So I'm trying to help the people who are interested in Kubrick's film to study them and to use the documents, such as Kubrick's interviews or the reviews that were published historically in newspapers and magazines, all the material that was published when a film opened, and and so on. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, just incredible work. So, we all hope you can get back to that when it's convenient for you. But it sounds like your hands are full, and you do so much, Filippo, to benefit the community.
Well, thank you.
It's the truth, my friend. So that begs the question, in your experience, what were some of the most interesting interviews that you have done for Archivio Kubrick?
Definitely the one that I did with Mario Maldesi, who was the Italian dubbing director of many great films, and specifically he worked for Kubrick from A Clockwork Orange to Eyes Wide Shut.
Wow.
And I met Mario in 2002, I think. And he was a fantastic person, incredibly enthusiastic about his work and very chatty. He invited me at his place, and we had several wonderful afternoons together. And he allowed me to see his little Kubrick archive, with the scripts that he was sent to do the Italian translations, and the letters that Kubrick wrote him to congratulate him for the job he did. And at that time, in 2002, nobody has seen anything of the sort. Because,
right.
nowadays a signed letter by Kubrick pops up every minute online, on Facebook, on Tumblr. But back then it was really thrilling for me to get the opportunity to read Kubrick's handwriting.
Yeah.
And Mario also had tapes, because he recorded on tape the telephone calls he had with Kubrick, because he needed that for his work.
Oh my gosh.
They talked over the telephone, discussing the voice of the actors, and like Kubrick didn't like this one, he thought that one sounded better, and Mario told him things like, you can't use this actor because he's doing too many TV commercials and people would recognize him, and all these sort of things. And it was really exciting stuff for me, hearing Kubrick's voice. It was a rare thing. And it gave me also an interesting look at Kubrick's work, because Mario showed me that it was true that Kubrick controlled every single step in filmmaking, up to the foreign versions. So that was really, really a thrilling experience.
I can imagine. Just hearing you talk about it is thrilling. In fact, you got to hear tapes of him on the telephone talking with Mario. Wow.
Yeah, talking with Mario Maldesi and Riccardo Aragno, who did the translation. He was a writer, and he knew Kubrick since the 60s, and he worked from Clockwork Orange onwards. And it was a very solid team between Mario Maldesi and Riccardo Aragno, and they worked together with Kubrick for the Italian versions, and they did an absolutely magnificent job. I really think that the Italian version of The Shining specifically, and Full Metal Jacket, may well be even better than the original ones. I really love their work on The Shining and Full Metal Jacket. It's so effective, it's so powerful, and because it's your own language, it affects me really, really deeply. So they did an incredible job. And Mario also was responsible for many great films, for many great Italian versions of great films. So it was really also an honor for me to meet him. He was a really fantastic person. Yeah.
Wow, gosh, I can only imagine. I have to ask this follow-up question. Do you know what became of Mario's tapes and Riccardo as well?
They are still in his house, and I spoke with his daughters because they had an idea of honoring Mario's legacy. And we discussed this topic several years ago, and usually we exchange conversation now and then, and if they decide to do something, as I suggest them to do, not only about Kubrick but with all the other great directors that Mario worked with, that would be amazing. And if you consider that what is exciting about Kubrick in Mario Maldesi's archive, and multiply it for Fellini or The Exorcist, and the films by James Cameron. Because usually when a foreign director started working with Mario, then he imposed him to the production, and he wanted him to do the Italian version of all the subsequent films. So now, all these, after The Exorcist, for example, all the films that Friedkin directed are translated and dubbed into Italian by Mario Maldesi. So he was really, really one of the greatest. Yeah.
Wow. When did Mario pass, Filippo?
In, I think, 2012.
Okay.
Yeah, in 2012, yeah.
Wow. So that must have been, as you said, like one of the most interesting interviews. I have to ask another question about Archivio Kubrick. Any particular article to go along with what you think, your most important interview with Mario Maldesi? Was there an article you found that you feel is as important to you personally, or something that you're really, really proud of there?
Maybe the section that I called vintage section, where I had the idea of cataloging, scanning, and storing and presenting online back issues of magazines and promotional material. I think I put there a 1948 magazine with one of the very first interviews that Kubrick did.
Wow.
There's a couple of articles published in 1968 about how the special effects for 2001 were made, and the programs that were distributed to theaters for 2001 and A Clockwork Orange. And this is one of the very few sections that I translated into English, so anybody can appreciate the material that I put there.
That's wow. That's amazing.
It's just a little fraction of the things that I accumulated over the years, but still it's a starting point.
I mean, I've looked at your site, and several times, and it's just amazing. Exhaustive research you've done, and the vintage section. But I mean, again, for our listeners, have a look, because it's just, it's a lot of fun, and it's just obviously done with love. You can tell that your site was created with the touch of someone who really cared to just get it right, and the passion you put into it is evident. Did you ever get a chance to visit the Kubrick archives in London, Filippo?
Yeah. I visited the Kubrick archive for the first time in 2007 or 8, right after it opened. And now I think I can call myself a regular visitor, because I happen to drop to the Kubrick archive whenever I pass through London, which is always exciting. And, you can find literally tons of material, and for researchers and students is amazing. Is an amazing research. I think the family did a great service to film student and anyone who appreciate Kubrick's films by giving this great collection of material. And
they didn't do any service to us over here across the pond, because I'm jealous. We can't get our hands on it. That's not right. It's not right. No, I'm kidding. I just wish they could make, some nice high quality duplicates and maybe create a clone, Kubrick archives over here. But
but they are still cataloging the material. So maybe in the future they will be able
it's amazing
to put every single document online, because I think this is what it's all about, to give finally a true account of how Kubrick worked in his life, how much work he put into his films.
Yeah. So it sounds like you've been there many, many times. Do you remember how you felt the first time you went? What must have that been like?
Surreal, because for the first time you had the opportunity to touch your passion. It's something that happened to me when I was invited to Emilio's place and look at his own Kubrick archive. So I was really, in a way, lucky to have the chance of taking care of Emilio's material and taking a look at Mario Maldesi's material, and then visit the Kubrick archive. I mean, it's always an informative and exciting experience. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we have to talk about your book, because it's just as I wrote you a while back. I mean, that book and the accompanying documentary S is for Stanley struck me, and I'm sure a lot of Stanley enthusiasts. It struck me as rather a love story, and I just think it was so beautifully written and well done. I have to ask, what it was like when you first met Emilio. How did you come in contact with him? And how did the process begin, Filippo?
He contacted me in 2005 because he wanted to write his memories with Kubrick, and a friend of his wrote me an email to my Archivio Kubrick address. He thought that I was the right person for the job, so to speak. And so I went to Cassino.
You are.
Oh, thank you. I went to Cassino to meet Emilio, and he offered me an amazing story, and that I thought it was absolutely worth writing, because it is really a fairy tale or a love story, as you said. So, I tried to convey that quality in the book, and I tried to put in the book the excitement that I had while listening to Emilio's recollections of his life with Stanley or with Kubrick. Sometimes I use, when I speak about my book or about Emilio, Stanley drops in instead of Kubrick, because Emilio had this tremendous ability to make me feel connected to Kubrick, to all the actors and the writers, because Emilio was always there, and he was able to convey this feeling of intimacy. And so Kubrick became very easily Stanley when we were talking together.
Well, that's more than acceptable, even for just, we enthusiasts. I know that, Stephen Rigg, the founder of Stanley Kubrick Appreciation Society and the producer of our podcast, and so many others, all of us, kind of toggle back and forth in, either referring to him as Kubrick or Stanley because of a certain personal affection, even if we didn't have your experience of documenting Emilio's story. There is a certain sense of pride, I think, that people who really care about his legacy have in wanting to feel like it's okay to sometimes call him Stanley. As though he were a friend.
It's still weird for me in a way, because I didn't know him. I only met personally Jan Harlan and very briefly Katharina. It's still weird to address him as Stanley, but sometimes it happens. So, I think we all share a same deep appreciation for who he was and what he achieved.
Who is Stanley Kubrick?
Well, he's a man who was a film director, and he is no longer with us, and he made quite a lot of films, one named Clockwork Orange, one about an ape,
You mentioned having met Jan and Katharina.
Yep.
Have you ever had a chance to, were you ever invited to the family estate at Chittickbury?
No. Emilio actually asked me a few times if I wanted to go there with him, and I've always refused because it's a private place, and I don't see the point of going there just to visit. I mean, I spoke with Christiana on the telephone when I was writing Emilio's biography, and as I said, I interviewed Jan at his house in St. Albans. But these are conversations for my work. They had a practical purpose. When Emilio asked me, why don't you come with me the next time I go to visit Christiana? And I've always felt like I would be an intruder, and it didn't seem either necessary nor particularly important.
Yeah. Well, that's extremely respectful of you and very wise. I think you hit the nail on the head. It is, a different matter from being the enthusiasts or the archivists, and then there's the Kubrick family itself, and there's obviously just the need to ask, given that question, given how much research you did for your book, and as the screenwriter for S is for Stanley. So I want to go back to that. When you were getting started with Emilio after you'd agreed to write his memoir, like, do you recall whether you spoke over the phone to get a lot of information? Did you drive out to visit him at first? How did that begin?
Yeah, we talked in person. I went to his house. I was living in Rome back then, and Cassino is just about 2 hours from Rome. I used to take a train and go there and spend the weekend talking with him. I was there for around 20 weekends over the course of 2 years. So I got the chance of asking. I've got the chance to ask him whichever question I wanted and satisfy all the curiosities I had about how the films were made and what Kubrick did when he was not making a film. You know, what he did in those 3 or 4 years of nothing. And in the end, I learned that he did lots and lots of things, actually, because the work never stopped at Chidikbury. And as I said, it was an incredible experience to be able to know from Emilio never before disclosed things about Kubrick's life and work. And it was, in a way, the fan's dream come true, literally, because it was the biggest opportunity for me, both to work with something that was only a passion up until that moment, and to really get into my passion and be able to satisfy all the curiosities and the information that I wanted to know. Because Emilio was there all the time from 1970-71 up until 1999, 20 hours a day.
Yeah.
So his experience is unique. I mean,
Well, for any of our listeners who have not read Filippo and Emilio's book, Stanley Kubrick and Me, 30 Years at His Side, you simply must get it. It's just one of the most lovingly told and intimate portrayals of Stanley the man, Stanley the human being. And I think for a lot of us who've been reading all kinds of books, you know, starting with how his films were made to, you know, books that looked at his philosophy and examined the deeper aspects of him as a person, your book, Filippo, really just the icing on the cake, and a treasure trove. There are several really moving and emotional passages in the book. I mean, I'm recalling the part with Emilio's son's, you know, terrible accident, and the time when Emilio and Stanley parted company, when Emilio had finally moved to Cassino, and Emilio describing Stanley in his final days and the request for the oxygen tanks, and it's just it's achingly beautiful, if that makes sense. How did you handle those parts of the interview? It must have been delicate. It was also a bit difficult, and it took me a very long time to write the book, especially because it was my first attempt in writing anything that big. It took me a year to write the first draft, and then another year to rewrite it, I think 7 times. And then 3 years to find a publisher, and then another rewriting. So in the end, from 2005, when I met Emilio and started working, the book was out in Italy in 2012, so it's 7 years. And it's true that most of this time was spent in trying to find a publisher, because for some reason, I don't know why, but publisher said that this was not an interesting book about Kubrick because... Are you kidding me? Yeah. Wow. I really could not believe it. Okay, shows what they know.
Yeah, but maybe because I was really a nobody, so I didn't have any connection with the publishing business, and it really took me a while. But also the writing was difficult for me because I was given a pretty daunting task, actually, or what I thought was a pretty daunting task, which is to shape 30 years of life into an interesting book. To describe things and people I didn't experience personally, to give a literary voice not only to Emilio, which I got to know pretty well in the end, but to Stanley Kubrick as well, who is, the unknowable director par excellence.
Right.
And I wanted the book to have a strong narrative quality, to be read as much as possible as a novel.
Yes.
While at the same time staying true to Emilio's experience. So I wanted to achieve a balance between the facts and how to portray the facts in an engaging way. And I had to make all the people mentioned in the book seem vivid and lively as characters. But I also had to be respectful of their privacy, because, of course, there are plenty of personal things in the book, in the story.
Yes.
And so, it was really difficult, I think, to, or at least I was really concerned about it. Yeah, let's say that. I was really concerned about being able to shape it in an interesting way, be respectful of what happened, be respectful of all these people who are mentioned in the book. And at the same time, I wanted to. I think Emilio gave me with his story the chance of paint an emotional portrait of Kubrick, which is something that was never done before. So I really wanted, and I'm really glad when you said that there are many passages in the book that you consider moving and emotional, because this is exactly what I wanted to achieve. Because Emilio perceived his story in that way, and he cried sometimes when he remembered those things. So I felt a strong level of emotion when I was listening to him, and I wanted to convey that intimacy and that strong level of sentiment, of emotion in the book. Yeah.
You did, and again, you did, my friend. You accomplished all of that and so much more. I mean this with no intended or unintended slight to any other author on Kubrick, but I'm surely not alone in thinking that yours and Emilio's book really does something that no other book about Stanley has had done prior to it. It's just, I think the story so many of us would have loved to hear for all these years. And, hats off to you guys, both of you really, for bringing it into the world, because it's absolutely, essential that it's part of any fan's Kubrick library. And I just have to briefly add that in both the book and the documentary you co-wrote the screenplay for, S is for Stanley, the part when it comes to Emilio and Stanley having to say goodbye, and especially in the documentary, because I tend to be a visually oriented person, the part where Emilio is describing the awkward hug that takes place, and we never like to use profanity on the show, but we are quoting Kubrick. When the part when he's awkwardly standing across the room, and Emilio is recalling the story of how Stanley just says, "Well, fuck this," and they hug. I mean, I cannot get through that and not cry, Filippo. I can't. It's just that moving. It's wonderful. And so thanks for letting me share my personal favorite moment among many?
Well, I mean, I only have to thank you for your words, and I'm happy that the intensity of emotion that I perceived while listening to Emilio was brought into the book and into the film. So that was our intention.
Yeah, I mean, you really nailed it. Do you have one thing that's personal to you, which you think was the most interesting that you discovered during your interviews with Emilio?
I don't know, like everything. Because,
yeah.
I had. Well, I think it's two things basically. One is that I had an even stronger impression of the amount of work that Kubrick did, because even when this was something that I understood for the first time when I visited the Stanley Kubrick exhibition when it opened in Frankfurt, and just being able to see all the stuff that was there was a way to finally, because you've always read that Kubrick did lots of research, he read lots of books, and he contacted many advisors, but these are only abstract ideas, abstract concepts. And once you see the actual amount of stuff, of paper, of people, it's unbelievable. And the exhibition really made me appreciate even more Kubrick as an artist, because he worked so hard, and his inspiration came from extensive research, and I really liked that. And when I was with Emilio, I had an even more concrete, is that the right word? An even more actual, real feeling of the incredible amount of work and of love that went into those films.
Yes.
And the second thing that was even more astonishing that I discovered while talking to Emilio is seeing Kubrick as a man. Because Emilio spent, as I said, 30 years, 20 hours a day with him, non-stop. And they developed a very strong relationship. In the end, they were very, very close, I think. And that gave me the chance of having a glimpse into how Kubrick was as a person, how was his character, how he behaved with the people he was working with. And it is true that we have read many different accounts written by actors, writers, and the technicians in interviews when the film opened. But the how can I say it? Emilio had a very keen eye and a very good eye for detail. So his story was very colorful and vivid, and so his stories were really, really different from all the ones that I read or listened to in documentaries, in the special features in the DVD editions or whatever. And I don't claim that I understood who Kubrick was as a person, or if you read the book, you can understand Kubrick, the real Stanley Kubrick, and nothing of that sort, because it's not easy to understand anybody, and not because Kubrick was a complex character. But still, you have a more, I think, balanced view of him after reading the book or seeing the film.
Absolutely.
Because it adds another layer, and a very different layer, and a layer that was there for 30 years. So
yeah, I was going to say, on the contrary, I think your book is absolutely a very intimate, and while it's true, it's not capable to know the real someone else to use a phrase. I think what your book does is something that nothing else on the subject of Stanley Kubrick has achieved before. I mean, as Stanley Kubrick enthusiasts, everyone at Stanley Kubrick Appreciation Society, we've all read so many books on him and his films, and it seems, Filippo, that everyone who reads your book says that your book is just so much better in the way that it covers Stanley the man, not the filmmaker. The books on the filmmaker do tend to, at this point in time, there can be repeats and rehashes, slightly more in depth, but stuff we've already read, information that's been out there. And that cannot be said of what you and Emilio did, what you accomplished. So I just can't imagine how amazing it must feel, given the feedback that you guys have gotten. I mean, authors like Michael Hare and Frederick Raphael have both written, some portraits that had a very personal take. But, Filippo, your book just seemed to be so much more intimate, lovingly done, and again, ultimately satisfying to the fans who wanted to know more about Stanley the man. How does it feel to be receiving all the, amazing and deserved feedback that you've been getting for the book?
Well, it was amazing. I mean, and it was even surprising because the book was also an experiment for me, because it was the first book that I wrote. It was the first major thing that I did, and I had no idea what the outcome would be. And also because for the first 3 years, I couldn't find a publisher that was interested. So I started doubting about the quality of the thing, or the fact that maybe there is no more market for anything about Kubrick because so much has been done already, which was one of the answers that one of the replies that I got from publishers. But to me, this was really a unique opportunity to do a completely different book about Kubrick.
Yes.
And the feedback has really been amazing. And we both are really, really happy about it. Not only for, we also got a pretty good review on the New York Times. But really, what really make me happy and satisfied is the many emails that we received from people who just read the book and just wanted to tell Emilio how fantastic the story was and how emotional they were while reading the last part of the book, and how they appreciated Kubrick as an artist more after reading the book. So yeah, this is really, really gratifying and satisfying. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, can only imagine the personal sense of satisfaction and joy you must have in doing that. And then it led to, of course, the 2015 documentary, S is for Stanley. Now, you co-wrote the screenplay.
Alex read the book when it came out in Italy and wrote me an email saying he had loved it, and he was so enthusiastic about it that he wanted to meet me right at the moment. So to talk about it. And
that was that.
Yeah, and so we met and we spent an afternoon just chatting about Emilio, Kubrick's films. It was really just a chat between two excited fans, really. And Alex also had visited Chidikbury to interview Christiana for the first TV broadcasting of A Clockwork Orange in Italy. So he told me it was surreal for him to sort of revisit Chidikbury in the book with Emilio as a guide, in the rooms, because he was there as well. And
oh, wow.
So we did this sort of tour of the house in our minds while talking about Emilio's experience. And we kept in touch for a while, and then he told me he had decided to buy the rights to the book and make a documentary out of it. And he asked me to help him write the screenplay because he really loved this story that I presented. He described the book just as you did, as a love story between Emilio and Stanley. It basically is. I mean, the underlying structure that I used for the book was that of a personal relationship that begins, develops, grows. There's even that moment that you mentioned where the two lovers, in quotes, are separate. And they discover they cannot stay apart, so then they reunite. So I was happy to hear that Alex shared this perspective on the story, and he wanted to film the book.
This is the story of two men. E came from Italy and S from the United States. One was a race car driver, and the other one was a genius.
I said, I'm Stanley Kubrick. So I just looked at him, and I am Emilio D'Alessandro.
Emilio was initially hired as Kubrick's personal chauffeur, but pretty soon he became the man in charge of everything, from the props to the pets, from the actors to the members of his family. As a director and Kubrick junkie, I decided this was going to be my next project. So I went to meet Emilio in Cassino, where he lives now, and he told me of his 30 years next to Stanley.
So Stanley said to me, Emilio, this is Jack Nicholson, the new act for the film. What do you think about Jack Nicholson? I said, well, looks okay, but why don't you use Charles Bronson?
I had the opportunity to get a unique look inside Kubrick's life and to hear the story of an incredible friendship. I thought I knew everything about the man, but what I found is much, much more.
We worked together on the screenplay, which basically, because it's a documentary, it's not a classic writing job. It had more to do with structure, selection of the material, pacing, certain words that were necessary to be used as turning points of the story, where the film needed to gain momentum, where it needed to be emotional, this sort of things. And I was there when the film was shot in Cassino and then in London, just, helping around, help Emilio also feel comfortable. Because I knew him, this was 2013, so I knew him for at least, more or like 10 years. And I did also sort of continuity work, and then I was consulted during the earlier stages of the editing. But I think my main contribution to the film is that I wrote the book. Emilio's life with Stanley could have been told in many different ways, and I decided it was more interesting to shape it as the chronicle of a very long and affectionate personal relationship. So all the information, all the secrets about Kubrick's filmmaking are there, but they are on top of a deeper level, which we just discussed, the personal, emotional, internal core of this story. Because otherwise, for me, it would have just been a boring list of anecdotes, I thought. And in fact, I'm always a bit wary of discussing the content of the book, because I really would like the reader to absorb it without thinking. I got several comments, feedback from people saying that they read the book more than once, and for the first time, during the first reading, they absorbed the story. They wanted to know what happened. And even though they, of course, knew the ending, they wanted to discover how the ending would have been presented. And then they reread it and discovered all the things about how Kubrick made his films. And because I try to, in a way, hide the informative value of such a book within the story. So maybe you have to read it more than once to see how Kubrick produced a film. For example, this is something that it never came out in the feedbacks that I had, but for me, it was really interesting to know. is that Kubrick tried to build the Stanley Kubrick Studios, which would have been a place near his house where he could produce his films totally independently. Because we know that when he was distributing his films through Warner Brothers, one would suppose that he was okay with that, and then that he was only producing his films with Warner Brothers money. But then by talking with Emilio, I discovered that no, Kubrick really wanted to be even more independent. So I thought maybe if Kubrick really managed to build stages and a studio, maybe he would have rented it to someone else when he was not using it, and so earn money. And so from this money, he could have made a film completely independently, even from Warner Brothers. I didn't want to be the scholar over Emilio's story. I wanted the story to be upfront as possible. So maybe you have to read the book a second time to appreciate all the details that Emilio told me that revealed to me a specific way of how Kubrick produced his films, which for me was really another layer of interest in listening to Emilio.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, Kubrick actually did find a location, but then didn't George Lucas use it for the Star Wars prequels?
Yes, exactly, exactly. Because Kubrick was, of course, thinking about it and thinking a little more about it and then thinking even more about it. And in this very long and slow thinking process that Kubrick had, George Lucas came, bought the property, converted it into studios, and he couldn't do it. So
you were present with a lot of the Emilio interviews on camera then?
Yeah, all the time.
All of them. Right.
We spent a week in Casino and 3 days in London.
That must have been reassuring to him on a personal level, since he'd already trusted you with the book.
Yes. That is also why I was there, because at first he was very, a little bit worried about writing the book, because, of course, he was taught about never talk about Stanley Kubrick for so many years.
Right.
So I also had, when I first met him, I also had to sort of unwind or untie the emotional knots that he had. And this was a job that had to be done again for the documentary, because he had to be on camera, which was for the first time. And it took a little bit of time.
I think it's evident that the love that went into making it is on par with the love story that is told about, Stanley and Emilio. They are reciprocal. So
thank you. I'm really happy to hear these kind of reactions, because it was really a work of love in many, many ways. Yeah.
Well, speaking of that, I mean, Emilio's wife, Jeanette, was, a real part of the story. And it's not something that, a lesser author would have picked up on. And thankfully, you're so great at what you do. But gosh, how many times had I seen Eyes Wide Shut and I never knew that Stanley gave her a cameo? It was really interesting to read and to see in the documentary about Jeanette. What was it like, your experience with her? And do you know how she felt about Emilio doing the book and the documentary? If you're allowed to say.
No. I mean, the fact is that she had the worst part of Emilio working with Stanley, which is something that many wives of the people who worked with Kubrick had, which is basically an absent husband. And so for her, it was certainly difficult. And when I was in Casino for around 2 years interviewing Emilio, of course, I interviewed also Jeanette. And but my idea is to put her in the book as much as possible, because of course she is not in the story, because the main story is, as we said, the love story between Emilio and Stanley. But I think it was essential for achieving that kind of truthfulness in the story to present Jeanette as much as possible, because otherwise it would have been just a sort of a story in a void context, because I needed some sort of reality check, because I don't think that Emilio had very much a how can I say it? He was really into his work with Kubrick that sometimes he lost contact with reality, which I'm certain is something that happened with many people who worked with Kubrick. And so I had to constantly remind also the reader that in a way that level of intensity in work can be detrimental for anything else that is not involved in that work. I don't know if that makes sense, but...
No, absolutely.
So having Jeanette in the story allowed me to sort of saying sometimes, Emilio, it's just too much. What you are doing is just too much.
Yeah, well, it conveys the truth of so much of human love, which is that there is no human love without an accompanying loss. And it seems like, unfortunately, Jeanette was the loss part of the love story. But at the same time, it completely humanizes Stanley and Emilio's love for one another. So it's bittersweet and essential to the overall story. You know, it's the yin to the yang, if you will. And I think it comes across just very poignantly in the book. And go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I was ready to fight with my publisher in case they wanted to take out the bits with Emilio's family, such as the accident of his son, because I wanted those parts to be there, because they are part of the story. They are not the background. They are integral part of the story. But luckily for me, the publisher said, absolutely, you have to keep them in. And he encouraged my editor, he encouraged me to add even more of these little glimpses in the actual life within Emilio's households.
Who is Stanley Kubrick?
Stanley Kubrick is a guy. Oh, get down, Stan. I've got a dog called Stanley here jumping at me ale. Who made films. He made monkey films. Planet of the Apes, was it? I don't know. Allegedly faked moon landings, but I ain't having that. He's also a Yank who lived in Surrey and wouldn't travel far from his house. I've learned that from my boring friend called Stephen Rigsby, and I remember it. But I do know that he's quite a famous guy, and he also is related to the people who invented the Rubik's Cube. I think that was his grandparents or something. He made Clockwork Orange, no? Yeah? Yeah. He made Space. 1999 or Odyssey. He did Kubrick. Isn't it funny how you go blank? I know way more than this. He made a lot of money. He made some monkey film, have I said that? I blame the rave scene on this memory loss. In a nutshell, that's Kubrick's world. It's all very much like...
Thanks, Filippo. You really You're the best. You're so kind to give us this time. I do want to ask you, though, I mean, because this part was fascinating. I mean, one of the greatest parts of the story was, I mean, for us, was to discover that after 30 plus years working together on 5 films, Emilio had never watched any of Stanley's films until after they'd parted company. I mean, that is one of the most revealing things about the relationship. And it wasn't about, again, you know, Stanley the filmmaker, but more Stanley the man. Do you remember how you felt when you first learned, when Emilio first told you that he had not seen one of his films after?
It was amazing. At the same time completely crazy, and it totally made sense. Because Emilio was there not because he was Stanley Kubrick, the famous film director. He was there because he loved working with Stanley. So, and when I asked him, weren't you just curious of seeing the films? He said, well, I already seen them. I was there.
Right.
And I think this sort of naive vision of cinema was fantastic. It was beautiful because what is the point of seeing a film? I was within a film, you know?
Yeah.
So for him, there was really no interest. And then he said, and then I didn't have the time. I was constantly working. I didn't have 2 hours of time. Simple as that.
Yeah. I mean, and it's another thing that's bittersweet. It makes sense. I love at the end of S is for Stanley, just the way Emilio describes Stanley asking him, "Did you watch my films?" And which one did you like best? And he said, "Spartacus." And I
would have liked to be a fly on a wall when he said that. Just to look at Kubrick's face, Kubrick's expression.
I know.
With all the films that he did, Spartacus.
I know.
It's
to
perfect.
say that to Stanley.
It's the perfect answer. And it's also the answer of how Emilio was so trusted by Kubrick. Because it really didn't care about all the movie-making business.
Now that's brilliant.
It's a great line, yeah. I wished I had invented it, but it was just Emilio who told me. Yeah, who told me that.
I mean, you're right. It really is the perfect, answer in that it's the most honest. And given the way your book portrays the honesty of their relationship, it's not possible to think of Emilio having a more honest reply to Stanley's question of which one of my movies did you like best, pal?
Yes.
I mean, and the stories of Emilio driving around Stanley's actors and collaborators was fascinating. Like the young Ryan O'Neal story, Jack Nicholson, the various writers who were taken to meet him. You must have had a lot of fun with that. Do you have recollections of Emilio describing, like, well, I mean, in the early stages, it was just a job, and we know what his first job was in driving for Stanley.
And that is another case in which I would have liked to be able to invent such an opening, but it was really there. I mean, this story had literally everything that I needed to shape it as an interesting book and then the film, because everything that happened in the exact perfect order to have a fantastic story. I mean, you start with the giant phallus from A Clockwork Orange.
I know. And he's like, yeah, sure, I'll deliver a package, whatever.
Yeah, a package, yeah.
A hell of a package. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Terrible joke.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah,
I know.
I mean, you have to play around it because it's a hell of an opening.
Yeah.
And and then from that it goes on with laughs and tears.
The suggestion of Charles Bronson that Emilio had to play. Yeah. Was it Jack Torrance, I think?
Yes, for Jack Torrance. Yeah.
It's just
why don't you use that actor, the one that I liked? And again, imagine Kubrick's reaction.
Right.
When he said, well, Charles Bronson.
Charles Bronson, sure.
And then the other interesting and kind of tender thing is that Kubrick explained to Emilio why Charles Bronson was not good as a choice for Jack Torrance. So Kubrick met Emilio on his level, and he spent 5 minutes or whatever of his time to explain that Jack Nicholson is much better because of this and that and so on.
That's so cool. Like, he didn't just dismiss him, with no, that's not going to happen, Emilio.
As he said, what are you thinking?
Right. Yeah. Which would have been the reaction, I think, of most of us, let alone, a filmmaker or
of course.
the greatest filmmaker ever. Oh my God, that is so funny. And and to know that Stanley handled that with just, a kindness and a diplomacy because of how he regarded his friend. And it's just, wow.
It says a lot, I mean.
It does. Well, and I have to ask, because this is not your first time at the rodeo, as they say. I mean, you were given thanks in John Ronson's documentary, Stanley Kubrick's Boxes. Yeah, back in 2008. So what was your involvement? Yeah, what was your involvement with that, man?
That happened by chance because I was at the Kubrick archive doing research, and there was this man who was digitizing some footage, and I sneaked a look in the monitor, and I recognized it as the footage that was shot by Vivian Kubrick during the making of Full Metal Jacket.
Right.
So I got excited. I couldn't stop myself from starting a conversation with this man who turned out to be assisting John Ronson making a documentary. So we had a nice chat, as always, and we exchanged contacts. And sometime later, he wrote me an email asking for some material that I had. I think it was newspaper clippings about Kubrick's death and other material that he knew I had. And so that's how I got a thank you credit on the documentary because I took a sneak peek on that monitor while he was working. Yeah.
Well, I mean, talk about being in the right place at the right time. But there's some serendipity there because, I mean, Stanley Kubrick's Boxes is from 2008, if I'm not mistaken. And we're talking a decade ago. And now here you are, with this amazing book and a documentary of, yours and Alex's own, with Emilio, of course. So it's certainly, I was going to say, it must have been an amazing decade for you, my man.
Yeah, it was.
So, and it's only getting better. I mean, you recently lectured at Bordeaux. I mean, is there any way you can give us an overview of?
Sure.
Please.
Yeah, that was really super fun because it was the second academic conference about Kubrick that I attended. The first one was in Leicester last year. And this one in Bordeaux was a sort of continuation of it. So I met there many interesting people. Some of them I knew by name because of their work about Kubrick, such as Mick Broderick, and Peter Kramer, and Nathan Abrams. So it was really, really exciting and fun to be there and chatting with them and exchanging our views about the films. And in Leicester, I presented a talk about Kubrick's unfinished projects. I have a list of around 50 projects that Kubrick worked on and then abandoned. So it's much more than the usual Arion Papers, Napoleon, God-Fearing Man, or other titles that usually are mentioned in the literature. And the resulting essay is to be published very soon in Synergia Journal. So if you're interested in knowing more about the unfinished films, please take a look at it when it's out.
Absolutely.
And the talk that I gave at the Bordeaux University, as you said, was about the Kubrick mythology. And I wanted to understand why Kubrick has gained this mythological image of an unrelenting perfectionist, almost bordering on the maniacal, this tyrannical boss for his crew, a man that was alienated from the physical world, never seen in public, the usual Kubrick anecdotes, as he himself once put it in an interview. So we now know it is not the truth, but why it happened? I wanted to know, and why his mystique originated. So that was the content of the From Boy Genius to Barking Loon talk
at Bordeaux.
That I gave in Bordeaux. And so, I also wanted to debunk the myths that were not true, such as that Kubrick never spoke to the press and never gave interviews. During my research, I have found more than 300 interviews that Kubrick did.
300?
Yeah, and if you
Holy cow.
Yeah, and with only 13 films to talk about, I would say that it's a pretty big number. So it's not true that Kubrick never talked to the press. So I wanted to explore what happened in Kubrick's public image, why people are constantly thinking about him as this mythological, faraway, out of touch director, how it originated. And that is my the latest thing that I've written.
Well, I have to ask, this will be the final question about Bordeaux, and then I really just have one more question, but please tell us, there will be a publication of the lectures at the conference in Bordeaux?
Yeah, hopefully so, because I'm going to submit the written version and extended version of the talk to the university journal. So hopefully, fingers crossed, if they accept it, it will be published next year. As it happened with Leicester, I expanded my talk about the unfinished project, and this is about to be published, I think, at the end of November or October. I can't remember. So possibly within a year, you will know the answer of what happened with Kubrick's public persona.
Oh, wow. Wow. You're giving us a nice tease there for the listeners and for everybody. No, that's great. We feed on this stuff, my man. This is that's just great that you're even going to share that much with us. I know that people would pay. I know I certainly would pay hand over fist to have a publication, a printed publication of that lecture. From Boy Genius to Barking Loon, and absolutely, and other lectures from Bordeaux and Leicester as well. It's got to be just good business sense for them to put that out there.
It's not only my paper that are published; it's all the material that the people presented at the conference.
Right.
So in Synergia Journal, you will have the chance of almost be there at Leicester with all these within the academic community and read all the fantastic work that all the other researchers did. And it was really, really a fantastic experience and a very good conference. I really have to thank the organizers of these two conferences because they did a terrific job. And Ian Hunter and James Fenwick for Leicester, and Jean-François Bayon and Vincent Jonas. I don't know if I pronounce their name correctly because I don't know a single word in French. But yes, they all did a terrific job.
You're obviously very deserving of your unofficial title as one of the leading experts and archivists on all things Stanley Kubrick, my man. You've been so great to join us.
Well, thank you for having me. And it's been a pleasure. I really had lots of fun talking to you. And
likewise. The pleasure's all mine. I mean, it's just to think that I'm getting the chance to interview you and, well, just, have this informal chat. We won't make it sound too official, but, because I remember messaging with you in SCAS and Stanley Kubrick Appreciation Society. We always have
I am very approachable. Really, anybody can find me on Facebook and discuss Kubrick and whatever. I mean, it's always a fun. I mean, when I established Archivio Kubrick in 1999, one of the most exciting things was and one of also the purposes was to start a conversation with other people who were interested in his films. This is the point of everything that we do. I mean, even with the Stanley Kubrick Appreciation Society, the point is discussing and appreciate together and sharing a passion. Well,
it really is amazing. I mean, we're probably in the same ballpark, our age, Filippo, you and me, and Stephen, and to have something like Stanley Kubrick Appreciation Society has really been just a joy, because of how much there is to learn. I've been reading about Kubrick most of my life. I mean, before my adult life even. I've just always been very fascinated with him and many other things, but he's a big one. And I guess to say, to have the chance to have this community come together, and all hats off to Stephen Rigg for founding it in 2011, because I know he just started it as a hobby. As his friend, I know that it was just a hobby. Stephen has many other accomplishments to his name, and to see it grow into this thing whereby we get to chat, man. I mean, you and we learn, about more and more stuff, but then we have fun, and there's days where certain posts can just be very humorous, and the next thing will be, holy cow, I never knew that, and incredibly insightful. And it's just the perfect balance. So for me to get the chance to chat with you after our first interaction in SCAS, several months ago, it's just been absolutely amazing. And I can't thank you enough.
For me as well. No, really, it's been a pleasure.
This is the end, my beautiful friends. Thanks to author Filippo Ulivieri for another enlightening interview there. We spoke to Filippo on the 29th of September 2017. Filippo's book is called Stanley Kubrick and Me, 30 Years at His Side. The English language version was published in 2016, and of course the original Italian version is also available. The documentary S is for Stanley, which Filippo co-wrote, is currently available on Italian language DVD and Netflix USA, but promises a wider release. We'll be speaking to its director, Mr. Alex Infascelli, in an upcoming episode. Filippo's website can be found at archiviokubrick.it. A big thanks to Jason Furlong, our host and my co-conspirator, for conducting the interview. This episode we asked who is Stanley Kubrick to a wonderful little girl called Lily, and also to Martin at the George and Dragon pub in Barrowford, who shared his exhaustive knowledge of Stanley Kubrick with us. Also a big thanks to Mark Lentz for assisting with research for this episode. He's a great guy and he's the founder of the Stanley Kubrick Appreciation Society meetups in New York. Thanks to James Marinaccio and Jason Furlong for all the hard work that they do at the Stanley Kubrick Appreciation Society on Facebook. Please leave a comment at SCAS on Facebook or even rate and review us on iTunes. Feedback makes the heart grow stronger, and that way we know that we're not just talking to ourselves. This year is the 50th anniversary of 2001 A Space Odyssey, and in our next episode we will be talking to Dean Treadway from the brilliant podcast Movie Geeks United about his long-term relationship with the film. We'll now leave you to listen to a special piece of music that Filippo commissioned for the online trailer of his book. The piece is called Beethovenia by Wendy Carlos, arranged and performed by Enrico Ciolini. We hope that you've enjoyed this episode of Kubrick's Universe, and thanks for listening. I'm Stephen Rigg. Tatty bye.
Thank you for listening to the Stanley Kubrick podcast. Come back soon.
It's Kubrick's universe. We just live in it.
We have taken very thorough precautions in this podcast against broadcasting anything which might only be attributed to human error.